Okay, we're recording. And I'm going to share
Quick thing.
what?
I just wanted to make a comment about Gwen sounds like how my truck left me, LOL. I just wanted to say it's better than sounds like my motorcycle got stolen. LOL.
Well, I honestly, that is like the worst. I can't believe that happened to you, that you got your motorcycle stolen. That's terrible. But I hope you get it back. Okay, so sharing the screen for week 10. This is our backend SQL PHP, and I scooted over the assignment link for this week so you wouldn't be like, now where the heck did that go? And I also moved over, added these over there too, in case you needed them on there. I swear my cough was doing better, but it's just randomly agitated. Okay, so this is what's going on. Honestly, I am so frustrated with this whole thing. I'm sure you guys. Oh dear Lord, really? Oh, that's terrible. Hopefully you got it back. I mean, motorcycles apparently are something you don't want to own in Idaho. I did not know that that was something that got swiped a lot in Idaho.
Honestly, I've never heard of anyone getting a motorcycle stolen.
Yeah, me either.
Like,
And I'm like, two people in our class. I mean, statistically, that's impressive. Um, so I think what'll help is the best thing that we can do is talk, look at some of these videos. And I know a lot of people haven't been watching them. So it seems like if we watch them together and pause them and talk about them, um, chaotic good. Yeah, that's kind of what it struck me as. It made me laugh so hard. I was like, so you basically, yeah, I know. I'm not sure how I would feel if my car was stolen, but I got it back with like free body work and better rims. I'm like, not really sure how I'd feel about that. Anyway, so let me
now that we learned how
pause that there. Before we start the video, yeah, there you go. That's what I will hope for you, Mike. That your bike, if they put some stuff on there, maybe they retuned it for you and it's actually functional now. Okay. So we are going to watch the insert, update, and delete change table stuff for PHP. But before I start that, was there anybody that had any questions? Oh yeah, we talked, I didn't record this part last time, so I will record it for those people that weren't there. What we're doing is we switched this to a class project because it's been such a pain in the behind. Gwen was volunteered as tribute and accepted to turn in the working class project, and we'll be getting extra credit for that. So thank you, Gwen. So everyone else, what you need to do, because I have to have something turned in to grade, I need you to take either a screenshot or write some text. And in there, I need you to say working copy turned in by Gwen. And then I will be able to add that in for your stuff. Yeah, she was voluntold.
I do have a question about the project though.
Yes.
How do you want us to do this? Like, do we like split it up into little parts and that way each of us can have something to work on? Or
I think that's probably the best way to go, because otherwise it'll all get dumped on you. And in which case it will just be your project and the rest of the class is, that's not cool. I think that everybody needs to take a little piece, and you can always write a comment on there and say this section was done by, and put your name in there so that when the final project's added in, we'll have the commented out section with your name on it and say, hey, this is the section that I worked on. Does that sound okay to you, Gwen?
Sounds perfectly fine to me.
Okay, does that sound okay to the rest of the class?
My original point was is that if you want to get in there and bust, or either we can break it open what you've got left and a list of like what we need, and then we can
That's a good
hash it
idea.
out from there.
Yeah, and
That
then,
was just my thought.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it doesn't matter to me who takes what part. You guys, in this, at least the rest of the class, you guys have all been pretty good about picking up pieces and doing stuff. But I really do think that you guys need to, everybody needs to have at least a little section, and you need to put your name in there in comments, just so I know, okay, Mike G did this section, Mike S did this section, Gwen did this section, you know, whatever you're gonna do.
Yeah, I can post my stuff in there.
Yeah, and then when you post the project, just zip it into a file and post the zip file.
Steve didn't do anything.
Steve provided snappy commentary. There you go.
As I said earlier up the top, I'm here for moral support and witty commentary. I'm still working on the wit portion, so raw team raw.
And one of the things that I will say right now is I don't want this to be something that we're like, I don't want you to spend more time on this than you do on the forensics class, because we've already spent like 4 weeks learning some of this stuff. So work on what we can work on this week. And then if you guys get to a point where you're just slamming your head against the wall, put all of your code in and say, this is what we've got. And we had some problems with XYZ, and then we can go from there. I don't want to think of it kind of like, remember the issues we had with that on that hands-on final? I did not grade you guys nearly as hard as some of the other instructors could, because a lot of the stuff was taken from other instructors. And when I had to change it for our class, because when we're doing it online, it's very different than if I'm standing there in a physical room with someone working on things. Anyway. Yeah. Hold on 1 second here. Make sure we have everything turned on. Okay, yes, we do. All right. So yeah, no, and that's why I wanted to why I turned this one into a class project, because I want everyone to be able to get in there and work together and go, hey, what if I do this, but I'm having a problem with this, and then you can talk to each other. Honestly, the easiest way to learn with programming is to teach someone else. And learning programming in a vacuum is a problem. Yeah, you have to do it hands-on, and you have to have peers to talk to. So, I mean, that's why I tried to learn it in a vacuum, and technically I did when I learned C#, but I felt like my brain was going to blow out with a brain bleed. Because I went from knowing absolutely nothing about C# to having to edit all of the web pages within 5 weeks. And that was terrible. And I do not want that experience for you guys. So,
What are you talking about? We all had fun smashing our faces against the server project. That was great.
oh yeah, just fantastic. Anyway, so that's what's going on with here. And I want you guys to watch the back end, and then working with the PHP My Admin, so you can see how to do that in that section. So we're gonna he busted it up into a couple of sections so that you can work on the back end and give you a little bit more idea on working with it. And yeah, no, I was confused when I I personally, I think the next iteration of this class, that I'm gonna yank PHP completely out and do probably Python, because I think that's a little bit more, something a little bit more interesting. And yeah. So, but I had to go kind of
We
with
get to
what I
learn
was
about
given.
snakes.
Yes, we're gonna work with
Awesome.
snakes, and I'm going to rent them out, and then I'm going to send them to students' homes. No, I'm not gonna do that. Anyway, let's start this video up, and I will pause it, and if you have questions, we can stop and talk about it while we're watching, okay? No, let me put closed captioning on.
How to create a table in the last episode, I thought it was a good idea to talk a bit about how to actually insert data inside our database table, since right now we have these two tables that we created, but we don't really have any sort of data inside of it. We're not going to talk about selecting data in this episode here, since we also need to talk about something called joins in order to talk properly about selecting data, and that would mean that this would actually be a little bit longer episode. So for now, let's just go ahead and talk about inserting, deleting, and updating data, since it's fairly simple to do, so we don't really need to have a long episode to explain that. With that said, as you can see right now, I selected my database, and inside our database, we have comments and a users table, since we created that in the last episode. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a bit about how to insert data to begin with. So I'm going to go inside my SQL tab up here. Make sure you do have your database selected open inside. And from in here, we're going to go ahead and write some SQL that is going to insert some data inside our users table, just so we have something to work with, to teach you how to insert data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write something called a insert into statement, which basically means that we're telling it to insert some data inside one of our tables. And in this case, we want to insert into users, which is our users table. And then we want to tell it what exactly do we want to insert inside this table here. So in this case here, we do have a couple of table rows that we want to do something to. And when it comes to inserting a row of data, we do have different columns that we need to provide some data for. So if I were to actually right click on users and open that in a new tab so we can actually see our users table, we can see that right now we have an ID, a username, a password, an email, and created app. So those are the 5 columns that we need to insert data for. Now, in the last episode, we did talk about ID being automatic, so we didn't have to touch that one. It's just going to automatically create an ID. And we did also create a default value for our created app, so we don't actually need to create data for this one either. So right now, the only one we actually have to do something for is username, password, and email. So what I can do is I can go back inside my insert statement. And inside the parentheses, I want to tell it which columns do I want to insert data into. So in this case, if we want to say that we want to insert inside our username, then we do also have a password and we have a email. So right now we have these 3 different columns I want to insert data into, and you have to remember the order here, but the order is going to matter. And afterwards, we want to say that we want to include some values to insert inside these columns. So we're going to say values, which are going to be inside a pair of parentheses as well, semicolon. And inside of here, I want to provide some strings, since in this case, we do want to insert strings, not numbers. And if it had been a number, I would just write a number in here, but because we're dealing with a string or characters, I want to make sure we have these single quotes. You can also use double quotes, but it is just kind of a habit inside when it comes to SQL statements that we use single quotes. So for that, I'm going to go and insert a username. So in this case, I could call myself Cussing to do that. I could also provide a password. So in this case, I could say something like Danny123 just to have something in here. I do also want to point out when it comes to actually inserting a password, in more real life examples, we do need to hash the password first so it's more secure. Because if a hacker were to gain access to our database, they shouldn't be able to tell what the password is. So, doing a little bit of hashing for the password is something we need to do. But just because we're practicing here, we're just going to go ahead and insert a password that we can actually see inside the database, because we want to see if this works. So afterwards here, I'm going to go and provide the last one, which is going to be an email. So I'm just going to say John Doe at gmail.com, just to give it something, because it's just a placeholder email. And just again, to make sure we have this saved, I'm just going to copy everything here. And I'm just going to go and open up my text editor and just paste it in. So now we have it stored somewhere, so I can actually go ahead and see it in here, so we can just copy paste it again if we need it for another time. So what I can do is I can go back in here, scroll down, and I'm just going to go to submit this. So I'm going to click go. And when I do this, you can see one row inserted inside our database table. So if we were to click this, uses.
So if you do it correctly, you should see that nice green check mark and it will tell you, okay, you did this correctly. And I don't know if you noticed when he was inputting that it would actually do little drop downs with some of the things. You can select out of those drop downs, or you can continue typing over them like he did. So if you're not quite sure, you can always try those. And then I don't know if you noticed that before he put the parentheses, it also had like a nice red X out there, telling you, okay, there's something wrong with this. So it does have some checking going on, so that should help you while you're writing it.
This table, we're just going to tap the web open, refresh it. We can now see that we have a piece of data. So right now we have a ID as 1, we have crossing, Danny 1, 2, 3, go, and then we have a date for the time right now that I created this user here. So everything is working perfectly. So now let's go ahead and go in and add a second user just for an example here. So I'm going to go and go back, make sure my database is selected. Now, because I'm zoomed in, it's going to give me this burger menu up here. So don't worry too much about that. Just go in, click SQL again. And I'm going to go and paste in what we had. And I'm just going to change the values here. So we can say this is going to be Basser, and this is going to be just Basser 1, 2, 3. And I'm also going to go ahead and change my email to basser@gmail.com. And I'm just going to scroll down and click go. So now if we were to go in, you can now see that we have 2 different users. So now we have an ID as 1 and an ID as 2. And remember, the ID is going to be a unique identifier. So in this case here, each user has a unique number for each of them. That is going to be relevant for a little bit later in this video here. So for now, let's just go ahead and save this as it is and talk a bit about how to go in and update one of these tables here. So if we were to go back in and make sure we have SQL clicked, I can go in, we can now create a update statement. So if we were to say I want to update one of these rows of data, just to go back in here just to show you. So this is a row of data. As you can see horizontally, we have all this data here. And then we have the columns, which is the ID, the username, the password, email, and created at. So you can see how we have rows and columns, right? Just to point it out. So going back in, I want to change one of the rows from inside my table. So what I can do is I can write update, which is another command that we have here. And I need to tell it which table do I want to update in this case here. So right now I want to update the users table. And I need to tell it, okay, so we have the user table selected, but what do I want to change? And from which specific row? And this is where the ID comes in, because what I can do is I can say I want to set a new value. So in this case here, I can say, let's say I want to change the username of Basser, for example. What I can do is I can go in and say I want to change the username and I want to set it to a new value. So I'm going to set it equal to a new string. But like I said, it is more common to use single quotes, so let's go ahead and stick to what I'm saying. So what I can do is instead of saying Basser 1, 2, 3, is I can say Basser 4, 5, 6, just to change it to something else. Now we have, not 1, 2, 3, but we have 4, 5, 6. If you want to change the second piece of data, you can also do that. So you can also say comma, and then add another piece of data from inside that particular row you want to change. So in this case here, I can say that I want to change maybe I just realized this is actually the password I just wrote in here. So let's go ahead and copy this information here and say I want to change the PWD into Basser 456 because that makes more sense. So let's change the username into something. Let's call this one Basser is cool, just to have something, right? Because he is kind of cool. He's sitting right over there. So what we can do now is we picked 2 columns that I want to change, and you could pick all of them if you want. So you can just keep adding comments and add some other data. But in this case, I'm just going to go and say I want to change these 2 different columns. And I do also need to tell it where from inside this table I want to select a row, because right now we don't actually know exactly what we're taking. Like right now, we're just saying, oh, set all the usernames and all the passwords to this value, but we need to pick a specific user that we want to grab from the mix of users. So what I can do is I can say where the ID is something specific. So I can say where ID is going to be equal to 2. Because if I were to go back inside our users table, you can see that Bessa has an ID as 2. So in this case here, I can just go ahead and pick out, the person with the ID of a specific ID is going to have this data changed about it. If you don't know the ID of the user, you can of course also go in and say that, okay, so right now it's the person with the username that is equal to, what was it, Bessa. Or if I want to say, okay, so we need to have the user be a user with a username of Bessa, but also, and the password should be equal to something else. So Bessa123, for example, here inside strings, of course, single quotes. There we go. So in this case here, we only change the information if Bessa has this username and this password here. Or we can also go in and literally, I just made an unintended pun there. We can also say or instead of and say that if the username is equal to Hussing. So in this example, I'm changing the username and the password of 2 different users inside my database. So you can also use, a username search 2 times in a row and just say, okay, so if the user has a username of Bessa or Hussing, then change them inside the database. Or IDs, you can also write ID and say ID is going to be equal to 1. So we can actually say this is an integer. So we say 1, or the ID is equal to 2. So this would also be the first 2 users inside the table. So, we can mix and match things here and mess around with it as much as you want. But let's just go ahead and go back to just saying where ID is equal to 1 in this case. So if we were to actually run this and go down, say okay, or go, it's called, then you can see if we were to go back inside my users table, notice how Bessa is going to have his username changed and his password is going to change once I update. Okay, so I accidentally set the user ID as 1. Okay, so we changed the wrong one here. So instead of changing, the Bessa one down here, we actually updated my Hussing one because the row we wanted to change it where the ID is 1 and not 2. Small mistake on my end, but hey, it kind of proves my point. So now I can see the old version down here and the new version up here. So you can see that it is actually changed. So what we can do now is talk a bit about how to delete data from inside the database. And I want to give you kind of a small little example here because I get a question quite often when it comes to deleting data from a database. And I want to kind of prove a point here. So what I'll do is I'll go in here and I want to say we want to delete from our users database. So delete from users. And I want to tell it which row you'll want to delete from inside this users table, which is going to be done in the same sense as we just did with the update, because we have to pick the specific row, maybe based on an ID or username, something, mix and match this with and or, just like we did before. But let's just go and say we want to delete the one that has an ID equal to 1, which is the one we also just updated. So we have Bessa is cool and Bessa 456, right? So if we were to do this and go back down to the bottom and run this, you can see that now we get a small pop-up. So it actually says, are you sure you want to really execute this query? And I'm just going to say yes here. And then we say 1 row is affected. So if we go back inside and refresh, notice that now we only have our second user inside the database table. And this is where I'm going to prove a point, because what is going to happen when I insert another user inside my table here? Because if we were to go back inside my little code that I saved in here conveniently and went back inside and ran a new insert statement. So if we were to go inside an SQL tab here and run a insert statement and say we want to insert Hussing, Danny, 123, blah, 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 and run this, what user ID is you going to get? If you guessed 1, you are incorrect, because if we go back in here and refresh, you can see, oh, okay. So Bessa has an ID as 2, and then Hussing has an ID as 3, oh no, but that messes with my brain because where's user with the ID as one inside this table here? I do sometimes get comments underneath my video asking about, so what do we do in this situation? Because, one is missing. So what are we going to do? Can you just go inside and maybe change this? So we write 1 and then we write 2 down here. So you actually do this, and you actually update it because you can do it like this as well if you wanted to. So if I do it like this, now everything is matching, right? Put this out of the way. So now user number 1 is faster and user number 2 is crossing. So now it's not going to be 2 and 3 anymore. So it's not like weird or something. But it's very important to point out here that doing what I just did, changing the IDs manually by just going in and changing them, is a big no-no. Okay, you cannot do that. Let's say, for example, that one of my users made a comment inside the comments table, which now means that one of those users are assigned to a comment, and then I manually afterwards go in and change the IDs of all my users. Then all of a sudden, all the comments and which user made those comments are going to get all messed up inside the database. So don't change the ID manually. Just go ahead and leave the numbers broken as it is because it's supposed to be broken if you start deleting users. So if it says, in this case here, I can actually just show you another thing here. If I were to try and go in and change the ID to 2, it's going to give me an error message because this is the primary key, which means that there cannot be the same ID for all the different users. So in this case, because I tried to change this one to 2, but we also do have another user that has an ID as 2, it doesn't allow me to do this. So going back here, I would have to go in and change this one to 3 because now I can change this one to 2 because now there's no duplicates. Okay, so this right here is the right thing. Okay, don't go in and change these numbers to 1 and 2 because it makes sense to your brain to do this. So I get this question quite a lot. So I just wanted to make sure that this was answered properly in a lesson. I do know I kind of went on a rant here because I do get this question quite often, but I just wanted to make sure that people didn't start changing the IDs manually inside the database because, like I said, it starts breaking all the relationships to other tables, that kind of thing. So with that said, we have now learned how to insert, update, and delete data from inside our database tables. So in the next video, we're going to talk a bit about how to select data from inside a database table, since that is very important to know. So you can actually select and show data inside your website. And we will talk about selecting data, but also how to join data together if you have data from 2 different tables. Let's actually go and do one last thing in preparation for that. So let's go ahead and copy the insert code that we have here. Go back inside our database, make sure it's selected, and go inside our SQL console. What I want to do is I want to insert inside comments. And I want to insert a comment from one of the users inside my table here, because that is going to be relevant when it comes to talking about joins and that kind of thing in the next episode. So what I will do is I'll open up my comments inside a new tab so we can actually see what is going on. And inside the comments table, we do want to remember that we have a username, a comment text, and also a user's ID, because these other ones, the ID and the created app, is going to be automatically created for us. So we don't need to worry about this one. So we have these 3 columns here. So username, I'm just going to copy it, go back in here and say I want to paste it in. It was already in there, so we don't need to paste anything. I do also want to grab the comment text, paste that in as the second one. But then I want to paste in the user's ID. Now, it is important to keep in mind that because the user's underscore ID is a foreign key, it has to match one of the users from inside my users table. Otherwise, we're going to get an error message because there's no user connected to this comment here. And we did set it up in the previous video to make sure that we do need to have a user connected to it. Okay, so it is important that we have a user that is existing inside the database. So with the values here, I'm just going to go and say we have a username. So the username for this user could be cussing. And in this case, if we were to go back inside my database, inside the users table, cussing right now has an ID as 3. So I'm just going to copy that. Then we're going to go back in and make sure that the user's ID, which is the last one down here, does have the same ID as that user inside the users table. And I do also want to go in and write a method, which is going to be my comment. So I can say this is a comment on a website. Just so we have something in here. And with this, if I were to just copy this to make sure that we have it saved, If I go down and click go, you can now see that we're going to have a comment inside my comments table. So if we want to go in here, you can see that D, we have a pausing. This is a comment on the website, created at, and then we do also have our user's ID from the user inside our users table. So now everything is working like intended. So with this comment here, we're now ready for the next video where we're going to select data from inside our database. So with that said, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's the problem when you're doing recorded stuff. Inevitably, you will mess up. So does that make a little more sense? You can see like some tie over to what you guys were using, but you also get to see how to use that admin page. So you have a couple more options for looking at things. So hopefully that gives you that. The next one on the series is the select and join table data. And then we have connect to a database from a website. So do you want me just to watch 19 and together and we can talk about that? And then do 20 tomorrow and talk about making sure that you guys are connected to your database for the website. Does that sound like a good idea to everybody? Sounds good, sounds good. Okay. All right, let me open up this one.
So in the last
Blow that up there.
video,
Okay.
I showed you how to insert, update, and delete data from inside a table. And in this video, we're going to talk about how to select data, since we need to know how to do that in order to select data and show it inside a website. So with that said, let's just go ahead and dive straight into it here. In the last video, we did create a couple of data inside our tables here. So inside my comments table, you can see that I have one comment from one user, and inside my users table, I do have two different users that I could do something with inside my database. So we have Better and Fussing. And what I want to do here is I want to go inside my database and go back inside my SQL tab. Now, again, it looks a bit weird on my screen here because I'm zoomed in, but if it looks to my see it's right there. And what I want to do here is I want to create a select statement so we can actually select some data from inside one of the tables and actually show. And we can do that directly inside our console here. So if we were to go in, I can write a select statement. So I could say I want to select, and then I want to say, what do I want to select? You know, what kind of columns do I want to select here? So I could, for example, say username. I could also write a comma and say I want to show the email. And then I need to tell from which table inside our database I want to do this from. So from inside our users table. And then
I will tell you right now, select from. I don't know how many times I've done peer review where they forget the from part. So when you're doing that, remember from.
to write where, so we can actually select the specific rows that I want to select data from, since otherwise you would just select all the users from inside the database. So right now, what I want to do here is just kind of tell it which row they want to select from. So I could, for example, say where the ID is equal to 3 in this case here. So if we were to do this, we can actually output data. So if we were to run this, you can go down, click go, and then you can see we get some data in here. So one total we got from this query here. So if we were to scroll down, you can see, okay, so we got a person called Hussing with an email called John Doe, because he is the one that has a ID set to 3 inside my users table. So we select.
So this actually works a little more slickly than any of the stuff that we were using, because you can run it and it will actually pop the data up for you. SQL Server works a lot like this. So if you're using SQL Server at any point, it's just a slightly different interface. But unlike just using a text Notepad++ like we were just to learn, you know, the actual text of it, this way you can see after you use the select command exactly what it's going to pop up for you.
Selected some data from inside this table here using the select statement, and we got the information that we asked for, which was the username and the email in this case here. And we can do the same thing when it comes to a comment. So what I can also do is I can go back up here and make sure that we go inside our database. I want to select the SQL console. and that I can just paste in our select statement and say that I want to select the username, the comment underscore text from not the users table, but the comments table. And we do want to make sure we change this last ID over here, because if I were to go inside my comments table, if you followed the last video, you'll know that we right now have an ID column, but we do also have a users underscore ID. And the ID column is the ID for this specific comment, but the users underscore ID is the ID for the user who made this comment here. So it's very important that we pick the right one here. So users underscore ID is what we need to select over here. So users underscore ID. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy everything to make sure it's.
So do you guys have another inkling as to why he would use user's ID instead of just the ID on that? Anyone? Okay, so do you remember foreign keys? Technically, this becomes the foreign key of this that links the user table to the comments table. So if he does a join, he's also going to need to use that as well. But yeah, it is for that specific user, but it also allows you to join on both tables with that ID.
Saved, go back down, and then I'll go ahead and query this inside my database. Then you can see we get another user, or at least a comment from a user here called Buzzing, and we get this is a comment on a website. Now we do also have something else we can do, which is something that you usually see people do when it comes to selecting data database. If we were to go back inside my SQL console, I can do the same thing, but instead of writing which specific columns I want to pick something from, I can go ahead and write a star symbol or a multiplication symbol. And that will actually go and select.
Okay, so you remember what the asterisk is? Yes, good job. Select all.
Everything from inside this row here. So not just specific columns, but everything. Okay, so what I can do is I can just go and save this, go back down, run this query, and then you can see we get everything. So we get the ID, the username, the comment text, the created that, and the users underscore ID of this particular comment. So it's not really that difficult to select data from inside one of these tables. So you just need to run a select statement and just fill in the blanks, essentially. But now let's talk about something called a join, which is when you select data from two different tables at the same time, or actually you can do as many tables as you want. But let's just go and focus on two here. So let's say I want to select my user called Buzzing, but I also want to select his comment from inside the comments table. So now we're actually grabbing two different rows of data from two different tables. What we can do is I can go ahead and make sure I select my database and open up the SQL console, and I'm just going to go ahead and paste in what we have here from the previous example. So select everything from comments where users underscore IDs equal to 3. So now when it comes to creating a join, we have a couple of different types that we can use. We have something called a inner join. We have something called a left join, a right join. And in some databases, we do also have something called a full join. But in MySQL databases, like the one we're using right here, I do believe we do not have a full join. So instead, what you could do is create something called a left join and a right join union. We basically combine those other two types of join to get the same effect as a full join. Again, I'm just kind of like rambling here, and you probably don't understand what I'm saying. So let's go ahead and do a example here. So what I want to do here is I want to go ahead and create a inner join. And in order to do that, I'm going to say I want to select everything from users. And I'm not going to go ahead and add where ID is equal to 3, because that will actually be created a little bit later on inside this join. So instead, I want to go ahead and say I want to select everything from users and do a inner join together with the other table that we have called comments. And I want to make sure we do it on a certain column. So right now we have two different columns from inside each table, and those columns are going to have the same data inside of them to kind of connect them together. So right now we have inside our users table, we have an ID. So our user has an ID as 3. And inside our comments table, we have a comment where the users underscore ID is equal to 3. So what I want to do here is I want to combine these two tables where we have this same column data. right? Because we made a foreign key, so we can do that using the foreign key, because that is perfect for that kind of thing. So what I'll do is I'll go back inside my query and say I want to select from my users table, so users dot, and then you can see we get some options here. So I'm going to select the ID, where it's equal.
So this is actually something I love when you're doing, this is exactly how SQL Server runs. You notice when you did the dot, it dropped your list of options down. So when you're doing that, you can just look at your list and say, okay, I want to do users dot, and then I say, okay, these are my options. And then you can just select that.
To our comments dots.
See-
Then you can see we get users underscore ID, and then basically spit out the data based on these two tables here. So again, before we query this, just to explain it again.
And basically what he's saying is users.id, the numbers and and stuff in there is equal to the comments.users ID. So that's that foreign key that I was talking about.
Again, because the node joins to be a little bit confusing to people, we'll basically combine two tables together. And we want to select everything from both of these tables. And we start by selecting one table. So in this case, here the users table. Then I want to inner join it with my comments table. And I want to combine the data from these two tables using one column from each table that has the same data inside of it. So if I were to copy this, just to make sure we get any errors, we still have it here. If I were to scroll down and run this, you can actually see that we're going to get one result, and that is going to be my user. So in this case, here with an ID is 3, cussing, password, email, created app, and then we also get the comment over here. So everything is combined in one row of data. And just to show another example here, because you can also go back in here, if I were to select my database and run another query and paste everything back in, you don't have to select everything from both of these tables here. You could also just go in and say that you want to select from the users table. So users dot username, and you might also want to select something from the comments table. So we can say comments dot comment text in this example here, and maybe also another piece of data from the comments table. So we can say comments dot created at. So if you want to select specific data, you can also do that. So we would actually run this. Scroll down, you can see we get the same kind of thing, but now we just get the columns that we asked for from both of these tables. And I do want to point out here that if I were to have another comment inside my comments table made by the other user named Besser, in that case, we would actually get 2 rows of data down here. So right now we have this row of data here, but we would actually get a second row below it with Besser instead, because all we're asking is to grab data from 2 tables that has matching ID and user ID and spit it out. And any other sort of data that does not have any matches is not going to get shown when we actually query this, which is why we only get one piece of data down here. But let's go ahead and talk about left and right join, because that is going to change things a little bit. So if I were to go and select my database, go back inside my query, and just paste everything in. And instead, I'm going to do a left join, which means that basically this users table is the primary table we have in focus. And I want to join it together with any sort of comments that are made by my users. So even if a user does not have a comment, we're still going to show all the users from inside our users table, but they're just not going to have the comments shown next to it. So by doing a left join, you can kind of see here that we have the users on the left here and we have comments on the right side. And that is basically what we're talking about here when doing a left join. So, this is the left side, this is the right side. We can also do a right join, which means that we're talking about the comments on the right side and not the users on the left side. So this is the primary one that we're focusing on. But just to kind of demonstrate this, if we were to do a left join, I am now selecting all the users, no matter if they have a comment assigned to them. So in this case here, if we were to go ahead and do this and run it inside below here, you can see if we were to click go, we would now get 2 pieces of data because I'm grabbing all the users, but you'll notice that the user that does not have a comment does not have any sort of data. It just has null instead because we have no data. So in this case, you can kind of see that we still grab everything from our users table, but not everything from our comments table. Only the comments that have a matching user is going to get grabbed. And we can also do the same thing the other way. So if we were to go back inside my database and do a right join instead, I can just paste everything in here and say I want to do a right join. then I'm going to show all the comments, but only the users that actually made a comment where these actually match when it comes to the columns. So in this case, we're just going to get one row of data, which is going to be the exact same thing as when we did our inner join. That is just coincidence, by the way. So it would actually run this. You can see we get one row of data. That is going to be our fuzzing because he actually has a comment. So we're showing all the comments here, but not all the users, which in this case, it would just be one row of data. So if I were to have more than one comment inside my comments table, we would have all those comments listed below here, but the user information would just say null instead. So the opposite of doing a left join, essentially in our case, with this example I have to show you. And that is basically how to select data from inside our database. And I just want to point out here that I know we talked about joins in this episode here. In a lot of cases, when it comes to just grabbing data from the database, you're just going to be doing what we did at the beginning of this video. You're not going to be using join for something specific. That is more for other specific purposes. Inside your website, we actually do want to combine data from different tables. But in most cases, you're just going to select the data using what we did at the beginning. So don't worry too much about these joins here. They are good to know. But we're not going to be using them, when we start selecting data from inside our website in the upcoming examples, when we actually start talking about how to use PHP to select data from inside a website database. So with that said, this is how to select data. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Okay. So he makes it a lot more understandable, in my opinion. So if you look in that form PHP, let me see if I can just open. Visual Studio. Hold on one second. I think I have it open in my last one. Let me stop sharing. You can use the form PHP, or you can use that as a template, and it might actually work a little bit better this way. You can use that as a template, and hold on. Yes, I know there's an update. Please don't update me. I'm just trying to get it to load everything. If you use Visual Studio, you know what I'm talking about. Let me share the screen. Come on. Having a little fit now. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is what, let me exit out here. This is what I'm talking about, the form PHP. Rather than doing all of this stuff, the default way that they've got that listed here, you can always use this as a, what do you call it, a template, and go in and do it just the way that he was talking about. So create your table, and then have these sections in there. This is the hard-coded version of if you were going to do it this way. And it's nifty, but I have a feeling that this page right here is the one that's been causing a lot of problems with people. So if we want to try to use the way that he's been using it and open up that PHP admin, I think that might actually be a little bit, has this one been a problem for people or not? Not for, okay, so it's able to, it works just fine for you, Gwen. Okay, good. Okay, I was gonna say, I'm not sure if this is gonna be a problem for people, or if it, because you can never tell when it's something that someone else has created, if it's going to give you the bird. So that's why I went through that and showed you that you can also work through the PHP admin as well. So those are two different options. So you can go ahead and use this, and that way you have everything all in there. And you should already have that. I will tell you, when I first ran this, my what do you call it? My antivirus freaked out, because it was like, what are you doing with this script? So if it suddenly disappears out of your folder, go check your antivirus and make sure it didn't get quarantined. It is not infected. It's just something that a lot of antiviruses are like, oh, this is out of the norm, so I will throw this into the quarantine. Yeah. So yeah, this is just really old. It's not something that we really need to use. But it was something that they had previously used in this here. So I don't think that we're actually going to be using this in here, but if you guys need to, you can throw that out there and use it. I will say though, if you're good at programming and you want to be in cybersecurity, it is an excellent crossover. So yeah, it would pay off. And a lot of times I've noticed people, they'll get a, excuse me, they'll get a degree in cybersecurity, but they'll get certs, or they'll do like boot camps like Gwen was talking about in programming. And that really works. A lot of the times you'll see those two crossovers in their resumes. Like mine has a lot of, that's why mine looks weird, because I have a lot of forensics stuff, and then I have a lot of cybersecurity stuff. So that's where mine crosses over. But then you'll have people that cross over with project supervisions, and that's where your IT management stuff. And a lot of times, if you cross section more than one thing, like if you can do cybersecurity and programming, that gives you a much bigger reach in the job market. Another one is cybersecurity and databases. So if you had all liked the SQL stuff, database, I could not believe how much money my friend Mike is making. And database jobs are in like a huge need right now. I mean, he went from 50,000 a year, and I think he's almost up to 130,000, and it's only been 2 years. And he did a bunch of boot camps and a bunch of certs and a bunch of on-the-job experience. So having your cybersecurity stuff and then throwing that in there, it's a really good crossover. So, but yeah, we don't go as in depth as the programming courses do. Any other questions? Everyone's like, no, please stop. Okay, so we talked about working with the SQL basics here. We talked about what we were going to do for the class project. And next time we are going to work on connecting your database, your SQL database to the website. And then we should be good to go from there. Yeah, there's been a lot of hacks when it comes to databases lately. So if you do a database security, if you have a good crossover with that, they really are in need. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here, and I'll talk to you guys a little bit about your homework.